It's good to see all your faces, so that's good. Um, okay, so welcome everyone to the fourth meeting of the advisory team of the Policies and Practices Project. Today is Wednesday, October 28th, 2020, and we'll be meeting for 2 hours again tonight. Both hours tonight that we're meeting will be public, and that's because we're learning, again, a lot of information that's good for our team to learn and also for the public to take in and to understand. And before I hand it over to Dominique Johnson, our facilitator, I just want to lay out the usual rules of these virtual meetings. All members of the public are very welcomed and encouraged to be here, but we also require members of the public to mute your microphone and turn off your video camera, which it looks like those folks are doing. That way our advisory team members, our police representatives, our facilitators can all see each other on the screen. We'll kind of have limited space here. This is not a meeting tonight for the public to ask questions. It's not a meeting for the public to engage in discussion. That's for the advisory team members. So like I said, while we are happy that the public is here, just keep your mics muted, keep your videos down. And, if there are any interruptions, which I don't anticipate there being, we would just ask our tech people on the other side. I'll be the one that'll have to ask people to mute their mics, which I really, really don't want to do. So I'm not anticipating that would happen. But if there was anything like that, I would ask people to have their mics muted. And we also never want to boot anybody out of a meeting, but that has happened on occasion. So don't make me have to ask that. So with that all said, and let's get settled. Tonight, we are really here and we are dedicating our time to finding better ways to really meet the needs of people who are undergoing and have experienced sexual assault and domestic violence. And those are the people that we are really thinking about tonight. And those are the people that we're dedicating our time and our efforts to tonight. And so it's just good for us to remember those are the topics, those are the people that we aim to help in the future. So with that said, I'll hand it over to Dominique to take it away.
Hey, everybody. You may hear background noise. My nephew's here with us this week, so you may hear cartoons in the background. So I'm apologizing for that ahead of time. So tonight I want to I sort of am modeling Samantha. I know that when we sort of give her the space, she always lifts up Black and brown voices that are sort of in the conversation and in the current news media. So I do want to hold space for the Philadelphia incident with Walter Wallace, as well as we're uplifting sort of the space right now to look into sexual violence, sexual assault and domestic violence, and have been so gracious tonight to have speakers on this team that can talk to us about this, as well as the chiefs and the team about that. So I do want to hold space for that and acknowledge it and let you all know that we're here if you need us to sort of talk about that. But the good thing is that we have sort of been in a space where we've collectively worked through the mapping activity. And so I think we're moving towards some progress in getting some of these recommendations on paper to move the conversation and the work forward as we reimagine public safety here in Red Wing. So the definition of ready tonight is that you all have your current data grid that's filled out with the data that we learned from the police department in the last meeting. So show of hands, if you have that grid and you're ready to go for tonight, you're fired up about it. All right, I threw the fired up part in, but you probably are just here and ready to go. And the second piece is that tonight we're going to have team members have an understanding about how Hope Coalition and the Red Wing Police Department each handle sexual assault calls and domestic calls. So that's the first piece of it. And then we want to be able to work through understanding and examining possible solutions for law enforcement and community partnerships to work together. So the goal here is tonight to really understand sort of the aspects of domestics and calls for sexual assault. And we want to make sure that it is rooted in what is currently the structure, what could be the structure, and what do we need to be able to ensure that it's meeting the needs of Red Wings community members. So let's just stay rooted in that tonight. And I think we're going to go over a little bit. Michelle, are we ready to sort of talk about the roadmap overall as we recap and think about how we move forward? Do you have a screenshot of that? Okay. So
yep, and Sarah's actually sharing that for
Oh,
us tonight because
all right,
she's our presenter. So yeah.
Yay, this is great. I love having presenters from the team actually do this. So we have been modeling our work sort of off of CPE's roadmap for exploring new models of funding public safety. I feel like I talk about this map so much because so many community members are utilizing this map in order to see which services might help law enforcement reduce their footprint on communities. So this is not a knock in the fact that we are trying to move the needle so far from what's to come, but we are trying to make sure that any type of enforcement that happens is community centered and is equitable for all community members. So the piece here where you're talking about conduct a rigorous analysis of public safety service demand, that's the call for service exercise that we did last time. And evaluate officer initiated activity. That was all in that mapping exercise where we went through 5 years of activity for Red Wing for the different service calls and where we've learned where we are in terms of looking at domestics tonight and calls for sexual assault. So we have completed that piece of it enough. Now we can sort of move on to step 2, where we're looking at mapping inefficiencies in police activity. That sounds very negative when you say that. What we're really asking is how can departments reduce their footprint in communities when it comes to understanding these calls for services? The 2 that you've identified tonight, we're going to look at sort of what's happening, where are the gaps, and then what could be the potentials of collaboration or avenues to sort of pull those capacities out of the department into other community-centered resources. So that's where we are right now in step 2. I'm going to hold off on step 3 and step 4 because I don't want it to conflate what we're trying to do here tonight. But just know that this is the roadmap that we're following to be able to make these recommendations. And I hope that when we sort of move into the conversation tonight, you'll be able to really pinpoint as community members where you foresee sort of the space of domestics and sexual calls for sexual assault being handled by your community members. If it's going to lie with the department, what does that look like? If it lies with community-centered organizations, what does that look like? If it's a cross-collaboratory sort of participation, what does that look like? And remember that it is always for the benefit of community members that are disproportionately impacted by the policies and the practices. So with that, I'm going to turn it over. I think we can stop sharing now, Sarah. But I'm going to turn it over to Sarah, who is going to talk to us about Hope Coalition. She is Associate Director of Hope Coalition, as well as a crucial member of our advisory team, and Chief Roger Pullman and Training Officer Corey Huberty. We're going to spend, we're a little bit over time right now. We're going to spend, it says from 6:10 to 7 on type of service call number 1, which is sexual assault. Let's say that we're starting at 6:13 and we will be able to wrap up at 7. So Michelle, do you want to jump in before I sort of turn it over to you? Turn it over to Sarah.
Yeah, I just had we had one question from an advisory team member right before the meeting started. So I just wanted to address that. The question is, when are we going, are we and when are we going to get to other topics or calls for service? And so just wanted to acknowledge that, yep, this is an 18-month process. So we will definitely be getting to lots of calls for service, lots of depth into data, how we look at data, how we, how it is, how we want it to be, all kinds of things. Right now for these next 2 meetings, we're really focusing in on sexual assault and domestic violence, but rest assured there will be less heavy topics. There will be other heavy topics, and we'll get to all of them throughout this process. So I just wanted to quickly address that we'll get to them. Yep.
And yeah, and I want to flag for you that not everything in enforcement is the heavy stuff. So some of the things that people have come up when we're working in different groups throughout the country are things like traffic stops, ticketing, animal calls. So all of those sort of fall under the enforcement umbrella for different departments. And so those are things that people can look at when we're looking at calls for service too. So not everything is sort of dismantling 55 years of systemic oppression or anything like that. There are some things that could be community centered and low hanging fruit, as they call it, when it comes to reducing the footprint or adjusting the footprint to make it more sustainable and equitable for everyone. So we will get there. These were sort of the highlighted ones that came up, and we want to make sure that we lean on our experts in the team to be able to do that. So with that, I thought I saw a hand, but I didn't. Samantha had a hand. Yeah.
I just had a quick question. I guess it was because I was the one who asked about the other areas of calls. My question or comment is kind of, I can't speak for everyone. My thinking about it was not because I'm trying to rush the process. I just feel like, me personally, in between weeks that we have these meetings, I feel and still not like I don't have anything on my plate to be working on. Like I just wish I had more information to be able to, brainstorm, research, or the other people team have resources for some other topics or areas that maybe they could be working on while we're, during this meeting. For instance, we're going to be focusing on what Sarah's presenting, I believe. But I don't know, that's just my personal thought. I just feel kind of like I'm not.
You could be doing more. Yeah. And so what we can do is sort of talk offline about that. What I think would be helpful is that there are so many service calls that were on the original grid list. So maybe it is that you all go through the different ones, and then we set up a structure where people can tackle different ones now that you had the mapping activity, and then do something like that. We have 18 months and we can decide how this looks. So it doesn't have to be so rigid. We could provide more ownership. I know in the beginning, people wanted to sort of get their feet wet, get the group together and partner up to do this stuff. So now maybe we take the training wheels off and we look at different ways in which people can take buckets of service calls to be able to do mapping, to then present to the group what they found in alternatives. So it's not out of the wheelhouse or the realm of possibility to sort of shake up the structure. It's all in sort of how the group wants to proceed, and we hear what you're saying. And so we will take that feedback and sort of make some adjustments and flag those for folks. But let us be thoughtful and intentional about that, and make sure that it's sort of centered in what the group is looking for. So leave it to Michelle and I, and we'll get back to you in terms of like best practices that will be most impactful and helpful.
Okay, thank you. And like I said, I don't speak for everyone. That's just me. I just feel like I'm not doing enough.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And we appreciate you for flagging that, because your voices may represent many of the different folks on the call. So don't sell yourself too short. But with that said, I don't want to sell this woman too short. Sarah, I'm excited to have you sort of present to us, and Chief and Officer Corey, ready for you all to sort of chime in and be partners in this work. So with that, I'm going to mute myself so you can stop hearing me talk and turn it over to Sarah.
Awesome. Thank you. So I know that Michelle gave in her introduction that guests to please leave their cameras off and to not speak to, but I do want to call out that Chris Coles has been the executive director of Hope Coalition for over a decade, and she's here. So if there is information to share, I would hope for her to jump in if there's more. So take that as you please unmute and come in as needed. The other thing I'm going to share, I have a slideshow that I'm going to share, but with that, I'm not going to be able to see if folks have questions or have their hand raised, so I'll stop sharing maybe every couple slides and see how people are doing. I do have the presentation divided in half between sexual assault and domestics with a question slide between, so definitely having that space too. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and share. I can see Juan and Dominique. Can you give me a thumbs up if you can see my, okay, awesome. All right. So yes, I'm Sarah Kern. I'm the Associate Director at Hope Coalition. I moved to Red Wing last July. So I've been the Associate Director for about a year and a half. And our contact information is there. So I just want to kind of give a general overview of what Hope Coalition is in case there are folks who don't know. We are a nonprofit that provides advocacy services for folks who have experienced domestic violence, sexual assault, who have either experienced of abuse or witnessed domestic violence or other forms of abuse in their home. We also have housing support services. We have 3 transitional housing apartments here in Red Wing, and then also provide housing support for those who are homeless or maybe need transition in some motel stays. We also have a community care fund that is mostly funded through small grants and community donations, where we are able to provide essential needs to people who are having a financial crisis. So we could do diapers and wipes to families who don't have enough, a food voucher, gas vouchers, get a ton of socks coming in, things like that. So that is kind of Hope Coalition in a very, very short nutshell. And I'm happy to answer questions about any of that if folks have any. Oh, there we go. Okay. So when talking about sexual assault, needing to talk about the intersectionality between sexual assault and oppression is extremely important. And we as advocates need to have a lens of how do oppressionisms impact people who have been or are going to be assaulted. Anyone who has experienced sexism, racism, ageism, ableism, all of these are more likely to experience sexual assault in their life and less likely to have a positive experience going through the system. So when we are training in new advocates or talking to community partners, we would want to talk about, okay, if someone presents to us having been sexually assaulted and maybe they come from a lower socioeconomic status, or they are older or younger in age, or they are differently abled, that those pieces of themselves and those pieces of their identity may impact negatively their healing process and the support and help that they get from community partners. On your grid and roadmap on the slide here, I have our calls for 2018, and then I have written down the calls for 2018, so I can give those out. In 2019, we have a 24-hour crisis hotline for our sexual assault services, and we had 81 calls come into that hotline. We serve all of Goodhue and Wabasha counties for sexual assault services, but we do have them divided in our database based on where they live. So 43 people that we served in 2019 lived in the city of Red Wing. So that's 2019. And then for 2018, we actually only had 15 calls come into our hotline, but we served 46 people. So hotline calls are things that are coming in usually outside of business hours. It could just be a one-time phone call, or you're responding to a crisis where the people that we're serving may be coming in not through our hotline. So that number, why that number can be bigger. So the services that we currently provide through Hope for sexual assault, I was saying we have the 24-hour hotline. Pre-COVID, we could respond 24 hours a day in person. So if somebody was going to be interviewed by law enforcement outside of business hours, we could send an advocate. If someone was having a forensic exam done at the hospital, we could send an advocate. Also can be there to provide emotional support over the phone. This was not here, but at a previous job that I worked, there was a woman who was a client of ours who got locked out of her home and was scared and in the dark. And I talked to her all night long as she walked around town. So like just providing that emotional support to people to help them feel safe. Our advocacy services for sexual assault are kind of divided into 3 buckets: general advocacy, medical, and legal. We'll primarily be talking about legal here, I'm assuming, so I will end with that. But general advocacy is really connecting folks with resources and emotional support. So connecting them with the food shelf, going into the schools and talking to teachers, talking to folks how it's impacting their job or schooling, and then also helping with coping skills, meditation, referring them to therapy, things like that. Medical advocacy, we have advocates who, again, pre-COVID could go into the ER and provide support during a forensic exam. Also going to doctor's appointments and dental appointments to provide that emotional support. If you think about someone who's been sexually assaulted going to the dentist where they get flipped upside down and have someone in their mouth and they can't talk, how that can trigger PTSD and trauma. So our advocates can provide that support, planning before going into those appointments and being there with them. In legal advocacy, we can provide support every step of the way through the entire process. So from the initial reporting to law enforcement, during investigative interviews, if there's interviews with the prosecuting attorney or the defense attorney, sitting in on if it goes to trial, sitting in on all of the court cases from the beginning to the end. We also can provide legal advocacy in filling out harassment restraining orders and orders for protection. So every step of the legal process, an advocate should be able to be there if the victim wants one. Whoops. Okay. So what is sexual assault? Last meeting, Chief Pullman talked about what sexual assault is in terms of legally, what they can deal with. Sexual assault is an umbrella term, and not all of the things under that umbrella are against the law. So if we start up at the top of this continuum, obviously rape with murder, forced rape, sexual assault, molestation, all of those things are clearly against the law. But then you go farther down to harassment, obscene phone calls, harassing someone on social media, and the rape culture that we live in, where rape is normalized in TV and jokes and misogyny in magazines and on billboards. Those things aren't against the law, and they're just a part of our culture that we as people need to be working together to change. I'm going to stop sharing for just a second to see if anyone has any questions before I keep going. I just unloaded a lot of information. Any questions so far? Okay. Oh, yes, Samantha.
So I noticed when you were talking about, like, when responding to these calls, what the advocates are doing, whether it be they show up at the same time or afterwards or on the phone, is that something that can be changed to having law enforcement not needed, or does law enforcement have to be there immediately for the call? You know, if they called 911, do they have an option to, like, can the dispatcher say, would you like a police officer, or would you like to transfer you to
an advocate? Absolutely. So that is something, that is a place that we could go. And I am, at the end of my presentation, I'm going to talk about a different modality of doing things that is one of the primary options. Okay. And I worked in a community that did that. Yeah.
I just heard that you had said it's what, like, or if changes could be made, but if you're going to get to it, then I won't ask anymore.
Sorry. And calls don't always come through 911 or through law enforcement. Sometimes they come in through our hotline. Sometimes people show up at our offices. Sometimes we get calls from schools or child protection. So absolutely not all the calls are coming through law enforcement. Michael, you had a question?
Yeah, I'm actually glad you pointed on that. I'm looking at this mapping, the whole mapping thing we did, and it said in the sexual assault 2019, there were 38 calls. And you had said that there was 81 calls in 2019 to the hotline. And I'm just trying to understand the correlation, because like you said, not all calls are going to go to the police. So the correlation of these 38 calls versus the 81 that you're speaking of. And I just want to get a little better understanding.
So we do not refer all of our calls to law enforcement, and I will go into more detail about that. We all have different roles to play, and our role is to provide advocacy and support. And we 100% believe that it is up to the victim, if they are an adult, to choose whether or not they want to go to law enforcement or not. If they are kids, we are mandated reporters. We have to go to social services, go to law enforcement. But as adults, they have that choice. We view sexual assault as a crime of power and control. It's not about sexual gratification. It's about taking someone's power and control away from them. And so with that being said, us as advocates, our job is to empower them with their own power and control to make their own decisions. So we don't tell them what to do. We tell them what their options are and what those options may come out of those options, and then help them decide what they're going to do next.
I appreciate that explanation. It just weirds me out because, like I said, 2019, 38 calls. 2019 with you guys, 81. That's a difference of 43 calls.
Those 81 calls could be the same people. It could be the same person calling multiple times. It's just how many times our hotline was called. So those are not necessarily individual people. We don't have a way to track if those are individual people because a lot of them go in under anonymous. That's just how many times the 1-800 number was dialed.
Sarah, and if I could, to Michael's question, those 38 calls for the police department are calls for assistance or that are reported to us through dispatch. Those necessarily aren't calls for advocacy assistance or anything like that. And one thing we've seen in law enforcement, as you probably already can guess, is a lot of times the victim will feel maybe that they had some part in it or a little bit of shame involved. And our calls, we figure, are probably half of what's actually happening out there because people normally don't want to get law enforcement involved in such a personal matter where they will be more willing to talk to an advocate or somebody trained in working with them in their situation. So that could be a little bit too why you're seeing lesser numbers to the police department's numbers.
All right, I'm going to keep going. And I realize in your questions that your questions I'll get to later. So I am going to just go through and then we will go to questions at the end. So what is an advocate's role? There are lots of things here that talk about what our role is. Law enforcement's role is to investigate, and I will let Roger talk more about what their job is. I don't want to steal his thunder, but in general, their job is to investigate, and ours is to walk alongside survivors. So I was explaining to one of our advocates today to pretend that her and the survivor were in a bubble together, and she was going to be walking with that survivor through all of the different places and avenues that survivor was dealing with. So hospitals, law enforcement, divorce issues, work, all of those things. So we're walking alongside and empowering them to make their own decisions and helping them kind of see a clear picture of what's going on. So we support their self-determination, increasing safety. We're serving as a liaison between the survivor and those systems. It is extremely exhausting, especially if a trial or investigation is going on, to be able to call the witness coordinator at the prosecutor's office, talk to law enforcement, see where that's at, call the hospital and find out what's going on there. And so, Michelle, something just popped up asking for HD to annotate what I was doing. I said decline. Should I have said it accept?
I am not sure what that is.
Okay.
Maceo, do you know what that is? Yep.
I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with annotating, at least not on WebEx.
No, I think, yeah, just decline, Sarah, and you can keep going. Sorry about that interruption.
Sorry.
Yep. Nope. Keep going. Thank you.
No, thank you. Sorry for my interruption. So informing of their rights and defending their rights. So that goes back to they don't have to report if they don't want to, and they don't have to share their personal information if they don't want to. So we are just sharing with them what their rights are and defending those rights if they do or don't want to do something. We provide them information that informs their choices, not telling them what to do. If you do this, these are potential outcomes. If you do that, these are potential outcomes. What would you like to do? So if someone's trying to decide to do a forensic exam, those are time limited. The evidence is only going to be around for so many hours. And this is what's going to happen if you go. You can choose what you want to do and what you don't want to do during the exam. If you choose not to go, that's totally fine. That's your choice. And a time is going to pass you're not going to be able to undo that choice. So informing them of their choices and then letting them choose. informing them of other services that are available, so doing referrals, listening. We believe everything. So it is not our job to investigate or determine what is true and not true. I was practicing this with my husband earlier today, and he said, well, what if you know they're lying? Like, why would you believe them if you know they're lying? So I will tell all of you the two things I said to him just preemptively. Number one, sexual assault, false sexual assault claims have the percentage as false claims of anything else. So false burglary claims, I can't think of any other crimes off the top of my head, but they all have the same low percentage rate. So we want to assume that people are telling us the truth and then go from there. Another story that I just want to share of why it is so important to believe people first. I was working as an advocate, and a gentleman presented at the ER saying that he had been raped. I believed every single word that came out of his mouth and supported him, got him hooked in with law enforcement, went through the whole forensic exam. And as that was proceeding, the medical personnel and the law enforcement felt like maybe something's not, like, it just doesn't seem right, but not right in a bigger picture. And through testing and more investigation, it came out that he was in beginning stages of dementia and he needed medical assistance. And if we had all just gone in there and been like, this did not happen to you, why are you making this up? You're lying, and walked away, he would not have gotten the help he needed for his dementia. It didn't put any of us out to believe him and listen to his story and provide empathetic listening and support. And we were able to get him the true help that he needed. So we start by believing, and we believe what is said. It is my job to take them at face value, not to investigate or try to figure out if they're lying. We focus on their feelings, assist them regaining a sense of control. Like I was saying, sexual assault is about stealing someone's power and control. And so I remember one of my very first trainings many, many years ago to become an advocate. The person training me said, you just give them choices. If you were offering them a drink, do they want the blue cup or the red cup? We are just empowering them that we trust their choices no matter how small, so that when they have to make the big choices, they know that we have their back and that we trust that they have the ability to do those things. Keeping confidentiality is huge. And this becomes a little bit of a barrier, become a little bit of a barrier with working with law enforcement or medical personnel. If I am with a client and I go in with them and sit with them while they report a sexual assault, if they do not sign a release of information and we walk away from law enforcement, if law enforcement calls me 10 minutes later and said, hey, I had a follow-up question about Jane Doe, I have to say, I can't confirm or deny that I'm working with Jane Doe, even though 10 minutes ago I clearly was. So we are bound by very strict confidentiality rules for our funding and just protecting survivors. So we know that that can be frustrating to folks, but the reason is to protect people. So just we hold that standard very high. We respect people's cultural differences and we empower. I hope that I've been coming across that empowerment is like the number one thing that we do, empowering people to make choices, empowering people that we trust them, and wanting to get their needs met. Goodhue County has a SMART team that stands for Sexual Assault Multidisciplinary Response Team. Goodhue County does have a protocol of how each of these entities currently should be responding to sexual assault calls. The protocol includes plans written by Hope Coalition, law enforcement, the medical team, prosecution, and corrections. There are other groups involved in the SMART team meetings. We have a therapist in private practice. We have people from social services there. I don't have the protocol here to present because it is actively being updated, and it should be updated by the beginning of 2021. In this protocol, regardless of point of entry, it should not matter if someone presents it at the police department, if they present at the hospital, if they present at the prosecutor's office, advocates should be called first. We are the ones that are trained in how to respond, and so we should be the first call. So what do we need from law enforcement? We need law enforcement to be trauma informed. we all have our own stories. Every single one of us on this call, every single one of us in our community, we have our own history, our own story, our own experiences, and those dictate how we respond to stress in our daily lives. There is no perfect picture of how a victim is going to respond to being sexually assaulted. And so being trauma informed and understanding that, that is what we need from officers when they respond. We need them to start by believing. Their job is to investigate the crime, but believing what is coming out at face value and then going from there. I have a horror story that I'm going to share with the caveat that this did not happen here. It happened in Washington. But I accompanied a survivor into a police interview. It was after her initial report, and then they were sitting down with a detective, and the detective slid the Miranda rights across the table and said, in every sexual assault, there's someone who's telling the truth and someone who's lying. It is my job to arrest the liar. Would you like to get started? Well, lo and behold, immediately she said, oh, nothing happened to me, and got up and walked out of the room. So we need to start by believing. We need to be trauma informed and be there. Understanding our role as advocates and having law enforcement understand that we're not there to get in the way. We are there to help survivors, and calling an advocate. And the reason why it is so important for an advocate to get there first is the initial response to someone reporting their sexual assault is the number one indicator of healing. So if someone reports to me that they were sexually assaulted, and the very first thing I say to them is, I believe you, how can I help you? Their healing process is going to be a lot quicker than someone saying, where were you? What happened to you? What were you wearing? Are you sure that that's what happened? And all of those kind of victim blamey questions that are pretty common in our culture. So I wanted to talk about this alternative way of providing and responding to sexual assault calls. So there is a program called You Have Options, or YHOP. I worked in the southeastmost corner of Washington State in 2 counties, but one of them, Garfield County, which it has a population of just over 2,000 people, and it is the least populated county in the state of Washington. Very farm country, so just like think rural Minnesota, and you're there. No lights, the whole 9 yards. So they instituted YHOP, and after the first 3 years were completed, our advocacy numbers tripled, and every single sexual assault investigation that they did in those 3 years ended with a guilty plea. So none of them went to trial, and every single one of them, the person pled out with guilty. So this was huge. Like, this was insanely eye-opening. It was just absolutely wonderful. So it came out of a program out of a group in Ashland, Oregon, and there's 4 components to it. So the first component is an agreement that you are going to follow the program and do what the program says. The second component is that there's 3 reporting options. There's anonymous reporting, there's partial reporting, and then there's a full reporting that would lead to an investigation. There are 20 elements. I sent the PDF of the 20 elements to Dominique and Michelle, and so we can send that out to the whole group. But basically, the 20 elements in a nutshell is that you're going to offer advocacy, you are going to start by believing, and you're going to let the victim lead the process. And then the fourth component is a consistent response. Once you become YHOP certified, you have a national certification. And so they just want the response to be the same across the United States if you go to a YHOP program in Oregon or Washington or Minnesota. So in Garfield County, we had received a grant for $90,000 over 3 years. I spoke to 3 officers at the Garfield County Sheriff's Office in the last 48 hours, and every single one of them said, Sarah, we did not need $90,000. I can confirm they did not need $90,000. We went to Florida to a training for 4 days with that money. We remodeled an interview room with that money. We do not need that much. So that was what they had. That is not what we need. 3 years, it took 3 years to do full implementation. So in year 1, they started with community buy-in by doing Start by Believing campaigns. Go to the county commissioners, tell them what Start by Believing is, and say, we want to be a Start by Believing county. Go to the city council and let them know we want to be a Start by Believing city. And that doesn't mean that we don't investigate. It means that if someone comes forward, we believe their story until there's a reason not to. We start by believing. And then starting law enforcement training and advocacy training, just getting people on board. My friend, again, from the sheriff's office said, I have all of these done. I will give them all to you. I attended all of them with him. So we definitely have a leg up in that. Year 2 is getting folks at the police department trained in forensic experiential trauma interviewing. This changed everything. I spoke to the sheriff yesterday and he said, Sarah, when I got FETI trained, I completely changed who I was as a police officer for the better. I was speaking to the police chief in Lake City and he too went with Russell Strand, who's the FETI guy, and got trained. And he said, this completely changed the way that I work with survivors, complete overhaul. To get the full training, it is just over $2,000. And at the end of that $2,000, you were nationally certified to provide these interview types. To just get the basic overview of it and how it is and what the outcomes are $400. So in talking about what we could do as a city, of getting investigators that full training, and then other law enforcement that may be the first responders or the first person on the scene, that $400 one. And then also in year 2, they did the train the trainers. So they had their training officers get the full thing, and then they could train the rest of the staff. In year 3, they continued sending new staff to training. Roger, who's the chaplain at the sheriff's department, said, and that was the year that we started training neighboring jurisdictions. And I want to say that they trained 15 jurisdictions throughout Washington and Idaho on that corner there. So just amazing successes. So I want to just share a few of the successes because I get really excited about it. So there was a young boy, middle school, that everyone knew. Everyone in town knew that he was being sexually assaulted. He had been interviewed multiple times by CPS and always was denying that it happened. And our YHOP team, which was the chaplain of the sheriff's department and our detective, provided a just overview of what YHOP was at the middle school. And when it was over, that boy came down and said, I think that what you were talking about actually happened to me. And he spilled his guts and said everything that had been going on for years. And his perpetrator was arrested and charged, and he was safe. And it's just this new way of looking at things and a new way of addressing it that is less in your face and more inviting, that allows people to come forward. We had another situation where a woman who was the kind of victim that nobody believes, that she had all of these, those things that we talked about in the oppression piece going against her. And she shared her story, and in her story, she talked about other victims, and they started interviewing victims, and they started bringing up other victims, and we ended up finding 9 victims and arrested the perpetrator and got, again, a conviction with 9 victims getting some justice. So just amazing new things and new ways of looking at things. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing, maybe, and answer questions. Doug.
Is that county you're talking about in Washington seen a decrease in the number of sexual assault cases along with the increased conviction rate?
It's really, really hard to track that because, as Roger was saying earlier, it's a very, very highly underreported crime. So we did see an increase in conviction and an increase in reporting, but we think it's because there was so much more talk about it. There were Start by Believing posters put up in the gyms at the school. There was a banner hung across the courthouse. And so there was more, we will believe you if you come forward. And so there were definitely the number of calls increased as well. Cholaway?
Among the cases which you've talked to that department about, are there any where the perpetrators were taken through an educational training just to see if there was a chance of change, or did it all end up going to jail or prison or being prosecuted. Just a little knowledge of sexual assault, because sometimes it could be medical and or those issues which come with it. So does that program come with a training which would help in that way?
So this particular program does not come with that, but Roger, if you can help me in Minnesota, I know that in where I was originally living or previously living, that before someone was sentenced, they went through an interview process to determine, is this something that education could help with, or is this something that it's not going to help with? Roger, is that happening here?
The one I'm most familiar with is during incarceration. I think while they're incarcerated, they go through a training segment, but I'm not aware of prior.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Okay, so that's information that we can find out more about. And we're going to talk about restorative justice in the domestic violence section, and that goes hand in hand with restorative justice of seeing, is there another way to deal with this outside of incarceration? One of the stats that I didn't share is that only 7% of sex offenders will ever spend a night in jail, which means 93% don't. And there's lots and lots and lots of reasons behind that, but getting people to come forward and share those stories and feel safe doing so is a huge step in the direction of having people held accountable. I see people's faces. I talk about this all day long, and so it's not as heavy to me, and I apologize for just dumping on all of you.
I want to say thank you, and I think it's also just a lot of information to process, and so we do want to give people time to sort of process that, and thank you for that. What I'm curious to also hear is, based upon sort of what you shared to us tonight, I know that folks really want to know how this ties into the current system of enforcement in Red Wing, because I know that the numbers based upon what you've shared and what's on the grid are different. And so I think this is a good time to also invite the chief and officer Corey to sort of talk about that. And then Sarah, you can sort of weigh in on sort of best practices that you see from the work that you do as they're talking about the work that they're doing, and we can then illuminate where some of the gaps may or may not be as a group. So Chief, do you want to jump in?
Sure, I'll just real quick. I know talking with my investigators, also, I know Sarah had mentioned forensic interviewing techniques, the FETI style. Every one of our investigators, when they get started in investigations, we send them up to Corner House, Minnesota, and they get trained in basic interviewing, forensic interviewing techniques. So all my investigators have the full course at that level, and we've been looking into trying to bring the basic patrol officer FETI course to Red Wing. The closest I know it's been is Rochester PD offered a class a couple years ago. So I know there are instructors in the area that we can try to bring to our department also. Also with our sexual assault numbers, as I stated when we covered them initially, sadly enough, a lot of them involve juveniles under the age of 16. And a lot of those gets back to known acquaintances, might be a family member, or it might be a boyfriend or girlfriend that that we work with the family to, there's such a difficult situation because you also don't want to re-victimize that young person. It was quite a traumatic event. You don't want to re-victimize anybody. So we work really closely with social services at Goodhue County Public Health with those sexual assault victims also. And then I don't know, Sarah, if you get involved with the juveniles much or just more of the adults. I don't know. I know our main contact has been with social services.
And our Kids Count program and our sexual assault advocates can work with the juveniles who have been victimized. And Roger, I sent the information over to the Goodhue County Sheriff's Department just because we had a SMART team meeting this week, but I can send it to you as well All of the FEDI trainings are online right now. And so it's all available for those costs. And I will send you the link.
Okay, yeah, and I think I don't know if Keegan Quinn is still representing us on there, but Tom Rickley should have been at those meetings also for us. I guess I don't know how much else. There's so much different areas you can talk to about this stuff. I guess if there's more specific questions or anything, I know from me personally coming up as a patrol officer, I'd say sexual assault's probably been one of the hardest calls I've taken in my life. When I was working in North Dakota after a flood of 97, we had 75% of the community evacuated. And I got called to a possible sexual assault call from somebody that heard screaming in an area. And when I arrived on scene, a lady came running across the road and across the parking lot that I'll never forget. I mean, it was, if you say shattered, that's what I would say. And it's really made sexual assaults one of probably the most, how you say to me, one of the most personal and most serious calls that we can go on and take, and that we want to really give attention to, because the damage done to that young woman's life, and working with her trying to catch the perpetrator. Yeah, I'll never forget that. It seems like just yesterday. Thomas, you had a question?
You're on mute.
Yep, I got it now. I just want to put this out there. Absolutely, what we're talking about is 100% important. I'm thinking about some people falsely accuse people of assault, sexual assault. And so when that happens, Chief, what I want to know is if you find out that the allegation was, bad, wasn't, was made up, do you charge the one that makes the false accusations? And the reason I ask that, because a lot of times, a black man, and I'm just putting this out here, will walk down the street and could be accused of, lurking, with the intent in a neighborhood or something like this. And so I just want to put this on everybody's mind just to think about something later. But absolutely what we're talking about is important. I just, kind of want to put that out there, if it makes sense to you, that, sometimes people, I'm just curious about that question. I'm sorry.
No, and in my career, I'd have to say the majority of the convictions come from acquaintance, or I mean, they knew each other. Stranger sexual assaults, in my experience, there's not as high of a conviction rate in those. They're harder to get a conviction at. And I don't know if Sarah, if you've seen that in your career, or Chris,
and again,
if you wanted to comment.
Yes, yeah. There's two sides to every story. And I'm not just, I'm just throwing that out there, but it also just brings up, like I said, that thought I had about, being accused of being false.
So I want to jump.
Yeah.
I want to jump in here, and I think that this could sort of lead us into understanding these different perspectives and different angles of it. So
right.
We have the map that we did the last time. Sarah, what I'm curious to find out is, like, where is the overlap in the different calls? So the chief gave us a list of calls, and you gave us sort of like 81. So is there any overlap, and can you walk us through sort of where the overlap lies? So that's one portion of it. Just because I'm curious to see what the gaps are and where portions of services could be sort of brought together or sort of pulled here.
Didn't I just ask that?
Yes, you did. So I want to bring it back to the front. And then Thomas, for you, Chief, I want you to be thinking about like policies. Like, Thomas is getting at the root of the policies. The national conversation is around sort of states taking Karen acts and bringing them to the forefront for false accusations and stuff. So what is Red Wing's policy around if someone reports a false sexual assault? What does that look like? So I want you to hold that right there. But Sarah, can you sort of answer Michael's question and sort of walk us through those different, like, sort of differences between where you all lean in with regards to the mapping and where the chief has sort of leaned in towards the mapping?
Yes. Can I talk about 3 things covering Michael, Thomas, and something that Roger said?
Yes, if you can do all that, you're a superstar. And then Chief, I'm going to hold you to doing the same thing.
Awesome. I have comments for all 3. So yes, something that Chief said, I just want to double up on that 80+% is between 80 and 85% of sexual assaults happen by someone you know. So stranger danger, stranger sexual assault is extraordinarily low. So and that's a stat for everyone to have. I do want to talk about what Thomas said and false reporting. And that is a huge because I totally hear what you are saying of being a Black man and having false accusations, Black people in general having more false accusations. And how do we deal with that? And sexual assault is the hardest crime to prove, because so often there's no physical evidence. And I would hate for us to see policies and procedures harming people who come forward and can't get a conviction, because it rarely happens. Women's bodies, little graphic, women's bodies mold to push out a baby. And so think about being assaulted and your body moving. So what you see on TV and what you see in movies is not real. There are many, 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 many sexual assaults that have 0 physical evidence. And then you have I said this happened and I said this happened. And if there's no physical evidence and the person said, well, she or he is lying about me, and having that person go to jail for that or have a conviction on their record is extremely terrifying. So I am more than happy to go down that road and see what could that look like. But I just want to say that scares me, just for the record. Then going, Michael, where'd you go? There you are. Going to Michael's question. So I don't have a very explicit reason why Roger's numbers and my numbers don't align. But what I will tell you is that if someone calls us, we will tell them that we will support them in calling law enforcement, but we will not tell them to call law enforcement. So if someone is calling and reporting that they were sexually assaulted, we are first and foremost are going to ask them about their safety. Then we're going to ask them how they're doing and what their needs are. And if they want to move forward with an interview, then we absolutely can do that. When I was talking to my sheriff friend yesterday, he said, Sarah, when we're involved in an officer-involved shooting, they give us 48 hours before they talk to us. Like, your trauma is real. Your feelings are real. Your adrenaline is up there. And so if someone's not ready to make a police report, we're not going to force them or encourage them to do something that they're not ready to do. Where do I see gaps? I actually see gaps coming from the other direction. We are not getting calls. We had Mayo tell us that they don't call in an advocate. Mayo's the hospital, that they don't call in an advocate until after a person has gone through triage, which means a victim could potentially be sitting in a waiting room at a hospital for 5 or 6 hours by themselves when an advocate could be called and sitting with them in that waiting room. We've had law enforcement say, we gave them your phone number and they said they didn't need you down here, so we didn't call you. It would be in the best interest of every victim, survivor of sexual assault, to get an advocate down there at the space and say what we do and how we can help them. If they say, we don't need you, we don't want you, we will 100% turn around and walk away. But having the ability to share with them what we can do should be a priority. Law enforcement should be calling us before they say one word to them. Before they start interviewing them, an advocate should be down there explaining to them what their rights are, and then going from there. And again, if they don't.
So what's the policy then? So I think that's the question. So I think, Chief, this is for you and Officer Corey. What is the policy? Because what I'm seeing is that there's like large gaps. And so then how do we, as a team, but also understanding the policies, mitigate some of these gaps so that community members are being provided the best service?
Also,
Yes.
not forget about men versus women, because men are also being sexually assaulted too. So we got to look at that too.
Absolutely. 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 6 boys are sexually assaulted before the age of 18. That is a huge chunk of people. 1 in 6 boys, that's a lot of boys.
Yep. Yeah, and that's, if you notice, like our policy on this is 10 pages long. So there's a lot of information in there and almost impossible to memorize everything to the point. I think the biggest thing we state in there is we are victim centered. Kind of like what Sarah said, our main goal is to help the victim. That person just suffered a traumatic experience, and even though it might be a common phrase, the need to make that person whole again needs to be primary in everybody's mind. And I think doing those things to try to help the person, like my consideration when I was listening to Sarah and they said they didn't call an advocate because the victim said they didn't want one, made me kind of cringe, because when I was on the street, I never asked. I called an advocate because we had great working relationships, and because I know that they just had a very traumatic event, they don't know or aren't probably fully thinking at that time. So to ask them for an advocate probably isn't the best thing. The other thing is, if we're ever going to come close to solving and figuring out who the suspect was in a stranger case, is the importance of getting a sexual assault kit completed. And sexual assault kits, I can tell you, are very intrusive. I know most cases they won't even complete them because they're so intrusive. And then there's times where they'll do the sexual assault kit and they'll sit in our freezer in our evidence room for quite a while until the state can provide funding for the testing. Or in the last couple of years, the state legislature has made a big push to test every sexual assault kit out there. Yeah, Sarah.
I just want to say that passed last week. So Minnesota legislation passed last week that all kits are getting tested, and there's going to be statewide storage. So it finally made it past. That should be a clap, not a fist, but that's exciting.
Wasn't there also just recently discovered a bunch of sexual assault kits that were recently stored for multiple years just in Minneapolis, like a couple of thousand?
Exactly.
That wasn't even brought up.
May I add
Thomas,
one more thing here? And we're here trying to figure and come up with equality for everybody. I was listening at news today about a bunch of statistics for incarceration rates for the same crime for men, white men and black men, or men of color, and in some cases were like 5 times higher, and sexual assault was one of them, and false convictions were part of that, but they were still incarcerated. So I just want everybody to keep in mind that absolutely sexual assault, where we can use police presence more is important, but to make sure that we're looking at the thing as a whole, not just police in against people of color, but the whole justice system.
Well, no, and I want to hear everybody, so I want to thank you all for that. What I want to make sure that we're thinking about then is, now that you have all of this information, what are we going to do with it? So when you're talking about, Thomas, and you're saying, let's think about the whole piece of it, policies are at the root of why these things sort of trickle in from the direct contact, which is law enforcement, right over into sort of the procedural justice system overall. So when I'm hearing,
is it policies or racism?
Well, let me see if it clears it up, Jess.
No. So not that. So what I'm saying is that, so all of it is rooted in sort of a system that has been disproportionately impacting Black, brown, and marginalized voices and spaces. So we get that. So
real quick. So what I'm saying is this: we're at the starting line, definitely, and we don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. But what I'm saying is this: in the policies and the things that we agree upon at the starting line and going forward, let's keep in mind that some of these things play a part in everything, because if, you know, we're looked at as, or if someone's looked at as a bad guy, you know, if we don't change that perception of how they look ahead of us, you know, if you understand what I'm saying. So just let's keep it.
No, I understand. No,
Oh.
I understand that completely. So no, I'm not negating that at all. What I do want us to be cognizant of is we have to also think about the things that are local in Red Wing that we have the ability to make recommendations on in 18 months. So you are not going to be changing the entire system. Like the goal, I'm not trying to make it a negative thing, right?
As we change the policy.
I'm speaking upon, when I speak upon Red Wing. I'm not
right. That's all.
upon
That's
any
the only
other
thing I'm
city.
speaking on. But there are, you know, things in our country that influence some of our actions or our thoughts. So what I'm saying is this: is just let's, you know, be mindful of thinking of all the angles, because there's always questions. There's always answers. Just let's, you know, for the whole of Red Wing, which is what we're working on, think outside the box. And
yeah.
You know,
so my question to you becomes then, so the chief, it seems like chief, one of your policies is like, it needs to be community centered, victim centered. Thomas, for you, I'm asking them, what does that look like? Because that is very open policy. That seems like we can decide how we want to show up in that. So,
no, man. No. So what I'm saying is this: if Chief Pullman went out on a call, and hypothetically, if he went out on a call and there was a white gentleman there that threw a rock through a window, he'd probably, you know, possibly he would get a pat on the hand and he'd go home. He came to my call, I threw the same rock through the same window. He'll take my name and pat me on the hand. You understand what I'm saying? So what I'm saying,
no, I'm not negating that this isn't true or false. Yeah.
If someone is falsely accused of something or police too hard, the only thing I'm saying is this: let's think about the prejudices that have gone on before, and just make sure that we think about those things as we create what we will create going forward, just exclusive for Red Wing.
Right. And so that's what I'm trying to get at. It's like, so the chief seems like this policy is very sort of open-ended and needs to be community-centered. So Sarah has pointed out a lot of these different gaps that exist that the chief is saying, well, these are spaces for improvement. It seems like you all just need to decide then, how do you provide recommendations to close these gaps? Because Sarah, it seems like all the things you were saying were aligned with what the chief sort of had envisioned. And then when we're talking about policy, he's like, it just needs to be community centered. So then what from the work that you're trying to do are you all going to say, then if you want to make it community centered, then it needs to have these things, some of which Sarah may have mentioned, some that you may not have mentioned. Yeah, Choloway, it looks like your hand was up, and then Liz, and then Samantha.
And just real quick, a victim centered.
Oh,
yeah, victim centered. Okay, so Choloway, Liz, and Samantha.
and I'm not trying to change the discussion, but I just had a question for the chief. Out of the, what would the percentage of those calls have come to you directly using that 911 call? And what is the percentage they should have called Hope Coalition or somebody else who can help them in that matter? That's my first question. And the second question is, do you think these are the calls you want to be receiving all the time, even if when you receive them, maybe, I don't know what percentage you have to call Sarah or Sarah's company to handle? What do you see there? Do you think some of these calls should have gone directly there? Do you think you want to be receiving these calls and handling it before you hand it over to the person, to the other departments? I mean, I'm just trying to figure out, because we are looking at 31 calls which came to you and 81 which went through Sarah, which simply means a lot of people in this community are maybe maybe bypassing the police and going for Hope Coalition for a lot more reasons than we know, like fear of the police, number one. Two, maybe people don't have paperwork to be in the United States. They are scared to go to the police. Three, maybe it's a husband and they don't want the husband to get arrested. They just want their husband to get help. So what I'm trying to find out, what's the percentage of the calls you received, which you thought you needed to receive them, and there was justice served afterwards? And how many calls do you think should have gone directly to HOP, and maybe finding ways of working it out so the people, the victims and the perpetrators maybe can all receive, what they need in case, in terms of education for the perpetrators, or some kind of some program where they can lend themselves to know that, if they're male, or female, and these are the things they cannot do. And how much education are we're saying this is juvenile. So I'm going back like to the high school. Are these most calls coming from the high school, both for Sarah and for the chief? And are we educating our community, our parents, and our schools on sexual assault so that our children know what to do and what not to do? Thank you, Chief.
Yes. Well, I think in response to your first question, the calls that we receive are far fewer than what the Hope Coalition receives. And they all come in through our dispatch, through our 911. So some of them, I don't know if dispatch filters any out or if they send them directly to an officer right away or not, because we have had that discussion in the past. But to me, and like I said, having experience in a severe rape call as a patrol officer and seeing the effects, I think all the calls should come through the police department in those matters just to get them documented. Because if there's ever any chance of arresting a perpetrator, if we're not made aware of it and they go the advocate route right away and we don't get called, to me, being a law enforcement officer, I see that as more of a missed opportunity. But I see Sarah's got something she wants to say.
I know that Samantha and Liz had questions. I'll just be super quick. So what Roger just said, I would say the exact opposite, that I think that unless safety is an issue, if someone is unsafe in the moment, then law enforcement, absolutely. We are not trained to deal with unsafe immediate situations. Otherwise, I think that they should come to advocacy first, because advocates are going to tell them how to contact law enforcement if they want to. And again, we're going to talk about restorative justice in a little bit. But justice does not always go through the justice system, because our justice system was built on oppression and doesn't always serve the victims. And I've seen victims horribly hurt time and time again going through our justice system. And so I will never steer someone away from reporting to law enforcement. I just want them to have all the information that they need beforehand and a support.
So then the question then becomes, what is your ideal scenario in Red Wing? So you all have sort of gotten this primer into it, then what is the alternative? Because I don't want you to go back and forth and say, this is all y'all seem to have an idea what it would be from the start. If I were to call, I'm having a crisis and I'm about to call, who am I calling? What do you think the ideal process looks like? And then what are the stop gaps to that? Thomas, I'll get to you in 1 second, but I know Liz had her hand up and Samantha her hand's about to fall off. So I will do Liz, Samantha, and then Thomas. And then I want to hear, from the time I pick up the phone to call, who am I calling and what does that process look like? Okay, Liz.
Thank you. Thomas, if I could just add to a little bit to what you were saying, and I'm hoping sometime you and I can get together and maybe just I like to introduce myself to you on a more personal basis in this group. But I have a Black son through adoption and a Black daughter, and I have a white son through birth. And after our meeting the other night, we were traveling to a funeral, and so my youngest, my white son, was with me, and he kind of started asking some questions like, what's the big deal? And so we started having the conversation of historical and intergenerational trauma, and really got into the depths of 200 years ago. And I'm ACEs certified. I'm Adverse Childhood Experience certified. So I was able to explain that process to him. And I think what highlighted what you were saying to me is perception. We all have our own perceptions, and how we respond to something, how we deal with something, how we view something as our own personal perceptions. And I would hope our policies that we come up with are written with the view of and intergenerational trauma, because that's so critical in dealing with people who have been oppressed, people of color, because you can't undo that. Now, through ACEs, they have shown that trauma is attached to the DNA. So it's real, it's scientific, it's proven. And how my Black son has responded to things in the community is really different than my white son. And it's simply because his DNA is linked to trauma and my white son's not. And it's real. And, we can't lose sight of the fact that how people of color perceive something, feel something, it's not they just feel this way, because it is scientifically proven. And if you need to see that, I've got the information because I'm state certified in it now, and I'm happy to share it with anybody.
Thank you for that. So as a Black woman, like Thomas, I'm not here to negate any of this. I think this is all true, all valid. My concern is that I don't want us to get so bogged down in the fact that, some things you're not going to change. You're not going to change inherent things about people and how they perceive you as a person. So my biggest thing is that I want to make sure that
just because I don't want anybody to think the wrong thing. What I'm saying is that the decision we make, for instance, with, again, sexual assault, let's, as far as calls and everything. So we're looking at that as well. But I want to make another comment about that. I just, I'm not trying to change everything. I just want to keep in mind of the things that have occurred about.
Yeah. And we know, and that's the thing, is that we're trying to move. We hear that and we know that it's not acceptable. So then what is going to be the alternative? So what I want you all to do is to take the map that you have.
One more question before everybody answers that question of you. Sarah, I got a question for you, if you don't mind. Do you have a liaison officer that works with Hope Coalition? And if not, is that something, Chief, that you guys could discuss and, possibly, so say if someone calls, all the calls get routed through 911 or whatever. And if the call seems like something, that liaison officer could be on call and, deal with that issue for the sexual assault along with Hope Coalition. Just something like that. If you guys do or you don't have a liaison that works with your Hope Coalition, with the Hope Coalition.
I want to say something emphatically as the professional person with this piece here. It is not a good idea to have 100% of the calls go to law enforcement first.
No,
I know that was something that Roger had suggested. Thomas.
Okay, so Samantha has had her hand raised for a long time. So Samantha, I'm gonna let you chime in, and then what I want you to do, Thomas, your idea, we're gonna write them down and we're gonna go around and talk about them. But Samantha, go ahead.
Okay, I feel like now I have so much on my brain because I've had something new has come up every single time something new came up. But I first wanted to go back to what Thomas originally said, and I get exactly what he, I think it was what he first talked about before we make these decisions on what is the policy or procedure right now as it stands for false accusations. I know that Sarah said that route is kind of iffy because you can't always prove if a sexual assault actually happened, or you can't always get a conviction because there's not always the physical evidence. But what I took out of Thomas's question was, if there is evidence that there was an actual false accusation or claim that, it didn't happen, and there's proof, and you can prove that it didn't happen and that this said person made a claim, is that person going to be held accountable at the state? You know, I think that's kind of what I got from that. Because I understand that sexual assault cannot always be proven. Does that make sense to
No,
anyone?
that makes sense. Chief, what is the policy? Is there a policy?
You mean on false claims?
Yes.
Yeah.
We have nothing on that in our policy because, again, we're trying to be victim centered. And as Sarah said, you want to go into the situation believing the victim too, because they're, you know, if it did happen, they're suffering.
Okay, so one of the things.
100%. I'm not saying that the victim, but I'm saying if there is proof that the victim is not a victim, and now the person that was accused.
So that's a
is
recommendation
actually
then.
the victim.
So Samantha, so then that would be a recommendation. If the chief said that that's not a policy that's on record, then when I ask you for you all to do this activity of flipping your map over and writing down what you think needs to show up, that's what you're putting down on the paper. So now everybody.
I just wanted to make that point on Thomas's comment because I feel like it was kind of misinterpreted.
Right.
Like, nobody is saying that a sexual assault victim is not a victim, and they're definitely have number one priority in getting the help and attention or, you know, resources that they need. But if in fact, after time, it can be proven that nothing happened, because we have to acknowledge that there are false accusations that happen. Oh, the girlfriend got mad, so she, you know, said this. I'm not saying that's the case majority of the time. I'm not saying it's the case always. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying it has, I'm pretty sure, happened. But we have to acknowledge that somebody falsely accused somebody as well, if that can be proven, because that can be the perception on the person that was falsely accused can be very detrimental to their mental health, or you know, just a wide variety of areas on how that's detrimental to the person who was falsely accused as well.
So I'm going to be the bad person for just 1 second. I just want to let everybody know it's almost 7:30. So I know we have a lot of questions, but I'm wondering if we can have people write down their ideas. And I'm only saying this because Dominique has told me to jump in when we're getting close on time.
Can I say this subject?
You can, but I just want to make sure, because we do have a little bit on domestic assault. This is such big stuff, and it takes a long time, so maybe we won't try to cover two in one, but just letting everybody know.
I want to make sure I understand, we all understand that we are on, you know, at the start. But let's remember this. Are we just deciding how many calls the police office take, or the officers take at, you know, the police station, and how many Hope Coalition take, you know, for sexual assaults? But we got to make sure we police equally. That's where I want us to make sure that we don't forget what we're trying to do. You know, not how many calls are going to go to the community, how many calls to the police. You know, I want to make sure that we try to, you know, get on equal, you know, footings for everyone when we're doing these calls, and trying to figure this out. That's
also what I was going to add too, was that.
Okay, so here's where I'm going to jump. Here's where I'm going to jump in.
So
I know.
data is more accurate.
So here's where I'm going to jump in. Everybody turn your maps over and write out your process. So Thomas, for you, it would be, you know, from the beginning, if you want to draw a map of, if a white person called this in and if a black person called this in, this is how I want it to go. So you map it out that way. If, you know, Samantha, you want to focus on what is the alternative to the victim-centered piece of if someone's falsely accused, write out, we're going to take 5 minutes, whether you want to draw it out, whether you want to write sentences, bullet points. If you were a person who needed support for sexual assault, write out the process. because what's going to happen is then we can overlay what the consensus is around these processes. Because as you can see, the chief said that the only piece that is really rooted in policy is that it needs to be victim centered. So we have 5 minutes. Turn your maps over and write out your.
This should have been done at the very beginning.
This is what we've been trying to get to, but you have to get the information first. And then many people had different views about how we were going to proceed. So I wanted to make sure that
people, I haven't heard from a lot of people in the group. So can we get a consensus with everybody in the group? Not just certain people?
We're not blind to the direction we're going. Only thing I want to make sure is that as we go, we keep our eyes open, but make sure that we're not trying to defund the police or this, that, and the other. We're just trying to make sure everything across the board is equal, from, stops to, wherever in the future. But basically in Red Wing, that we are all on the same page and, we're all equal people.
And with that, we're going to take 5 minutes so that everybody can write out their process. All right, everybody. Let's come on back so that we can see what you all have thought about or want to talk more about.
So Dominique, do you want to, should we go kind of around the table? I guess we don't really have a table, but we can.
Yeah, you sort of lead us like you normally do with pulling out who can
Sure.
talk about
Okay.
things.
Okay. So we'll just kind of go around the table, and I guess this is sort of like in a perfect world. This is not. I want everybody to know this is not. We're going to talk about things in a policy is immediately going to just coalesce, and we're going to be done after tonight. But this would be, what are some thoughts in a perfect world in Red Wing when someone has a sexual assault call? What are some ways, based on what you heard from Chief Roger and also from Sarah, where some positive changes that could be made? So, Yadira, do you have any thing written on your paper that you would like to share?
I actually do. I did write one that I can think of. I know there was a lot of going back and forth between, the difference in number calling to the 911 and Hope Coalition. So I was just maybe thinking, what if when you call 911, you get the option, to be transferred to an advocate or Hope Coalition? And then, coming from a Hispanic community, is there a bilingual advocate too as well? Or dispatchers and the 911 number, is there anybody else too that's bilingual that can help with that as well? That's something that I come up with.
Great. That's awesome. So how about if we go around? That probably there are a lot of answers, and I'm looking at Sarah, and she's got a lot of answers too. But let's go around. We are not going to get to domestic violence tonight. Sexual assault's a big one. If we make progress on that, I think we can all feel like we did some good work. So Corey Kaplan, do you have any thoughts on your paper?
I actually had kind of a similar thought to Yadira, and that if there was a possibility for like a trauma response protocol at 911 dispatch, I think having people memorize different numbers or knowing who to call, I think it's just the reality is people are going to call 911 in a lot of cases if they have an issue, just because it's so ingrained in our memory. But I think I really like having, almost that two-pronged approach that they call, the police department from dispatch and say, we've got a call coming in. They call Hope Coalition or whatever these other partners are that say, we've got a call coming in. And they're basically meeting at, where the victim is at. I think would be one area worth exploring. What Hope Coalition does is just amazing in the community and really, does support the victim. And I think that's what everybody wants to do here. That was my thought.
Thank you, Liz. And we're going to try to keep these, I know it's hard, but maybe to 60 seconds or just kind of as much as you can give with your high level thoughts there.
Two things. One, I don't think 18 months is long enough for this group. And two, I think, in the cases, and I know they're small, and I've been trained in believing the victim, but when it does go that it's not true, I'd like to see some restorative justice portion for the accused, because often their lives are ruined as much or more than their job loss, place in community. I do very personally know a falsely accused person and what it's done to that person, and spent a year in the legal system with it. So some type of restorative justice piece where then the victim understands fully what they've done to the accused and can start to help the accusement.
Great. Juan, do you have something?
To be honest, I don't have much on my paper. I think there was a lot of questions and a lot of great ideas that were mentioned, and a lot of the questions went unanswered. I mean, there was a lot of questions where I was waiting to hear from Chief Pullman, and he either didn't know or he didn't answer. So I think there's a lot of questions that we still need to get answered now. I mean, a lot of great ideas that went unanswered and that I wanted to hear from Chief Pullman.
Well, and I think there are a lot of good ideas. It sounds like there are people who are, and we'll go around the table first, because I do think there's some opportunity for openness, correct? Dominique, did you want to say something?
So here you on, Liz, I want you to write on your paper what your restorative justice program looks like. The thing is that people put in restorative justice and then there's no actionable steps to this is how it's going to look. If you falsely accuse someone, you pay this fine, you do this time, you do this. So you should make it actionable. Officer Corey, do you have something you want to add?
Yes, I just want to mention there is Minnesota statute 609.505 on false reporting a crime. And that's typically what we would pursue in a case. That the issue that we currently have is it's difficult to prove that it was 100% made up to hurt somebody, but that is a route that we
What's the burden of proof in the sort of the statute?
Well, the statute, I mean, I can pull it up quick and read it. The statute just basically says falsely accusing somebody of a crime. There's not like a list of burden of proof that you need to meet because it would be circumstantial. It's a open statute, is my understanding, for a variety of crimes, just simply falsely accusing somebody of a crime. So it would be typically, I think I've maybe ran into it twice where I've typed it up and had county attorneys review it. I don't know what happened from there afterwards. Pretty rare, I guess, that I've ran into it, but it has happened. I have recommended it for charges.
So what I'm going to suggest, because taking into what Samantha said, that she wants some homework outside of this, is that Officer Corey, I want you to work with Liz and Samantha, and it looks like Juan, and it looks like Thomas, and it looks like Michael. They have some dissatisfied faces about sort of this statute and what's happening. And I want to figure out like, how does this play out in real time? Because there doesn't seem to be enough of sort of support for the statute in the context of Red Wing to be able to support community members who are asking for this. And so what I'm going to ask you all to do is to work together so that when we come back next time, we can sort of map out this is what it is, this is what it isn't, and these are the things that I would like to see here because I'm not seeing it or I need to understand more of. So is that something that Juan, Samantha, Liz, Thomas, Michael, you all, Michael, I know you're probably like, no, but everybody else, do you feel?
I think Sarah has something too to.
If I can real quick here.
You know what the rest of the group thinks.
I want to say this because I just feel the need to. Chief Pullman is here offering dialogue just as we are towards each other. I don't know if there's any questions asked of him or his department as to statutes or whatever else. I understand, maybe in the rush of things that he may overlook something, but let's make sure that we're not here, dissatisfied with an answer that we don't get from the chief in a dialogue that we're all having, because
we haven't gotten an answer from him. That's the point.
The point is we're in a dialogue and we don't be pushing on each other to try to get to this common, goal.
And I'd like to just insert two things, or at least a couple, and maybe it'll clear up some of it. If you look at the date of our policy, it was, I believe, October 1st, 2019. The 2019 legislature enacted a lot of state laws after the 6 articles that were held in the Star Tribune paper regarding poorly handled sexual assault cases in the metro area and throughout Minnesota. So the legislature created a lot of laws that dictate mandatory requirements for law enforcement this policy is a model policy that's required by the Pulse Board. Again, that implements a lot of the state laws. Now, in our false charges, one thing we have is, like Sarah mentioned, we have our SMART team, our sexual assault team within the county that works on a lot of different cases, works on a lot of different convictions. Our county attorney, assistant county attorney, Aaron Keister, does most of our sexual assault, if not all of the sexual assault charging cases. So she sits in on a lot of those situations also. And I've never seen, where I've worked, I've never seen the county attorney proceed with a case that they didn't have 100% chance of a conviction or that sure of a conviction rate through DNA or some other positive type of evidence or knowledge of, acquaintance. So I guess I'll just throw those two things out first, and then if there's something else I missed, I'd be happy to go back to it, because there were a few of them that came kind of on the back of each other.
Sarah, did you have something written? Thank you, Chief. We can get to those, but I want to get around the table. Sarah, did you have something written on your paper as well as answering? Because you probably have some thoughts on what in a perfect world, something would happen.
I just really need to respond to something that's happening right now in this group. 2 to 3% of sexual assault calls are false, which means 97 to 98 are real, and we are falling off the planet here going into these false accusations. We have 30% of women, adult women, and 33% of girls, and like 20% of boys are sexually assaulted in our community, and we're talking about 2% of false reports. My heart rate and my anxiety is a little high because I feel like we're falling off what we need to do here, and our victims need their voices heard. And by going on this 2 to 3%, we are not hearing their voices. So if we
thank you for that, because what I want, so here's what I want to say. Because there are two things that seem to be happening here right now. And what I'm going to suggest for the next session is that we bring in sort of some supports here. What I'm hearing is that when people are talking about false reporting, the conversation at large seems to be around the false reporting of crimes. And so I'm not saying that is what is happening, but that's what I'm feeling. I'm wondering if it is sort of the false reporting of all crimes that are disproportionately impacting Black and Brown communities, along with the conversation of the sexual assault calls for service. And so that is where I feel the tension. And I just want to be clear, and I want you all to talk to me about this. Is it that we're talking about false reporting for this particular issue, or are we talking about we need to have a larger conversation of false reporting for sort of the oppressive systems that put Black and Brown bodies into spaces where they're falsely accused of crimes that are deeply impacted with the criminal justice system? Because if that's the case, that is an issue we can cover. But I do not want to negate the fact that Sarah put together a really nice presentation today for us, has been open and trying to make this happen. Her and the chief have been working really hard on this. And so I don't want to sort of, if it is the larger conversation around false reporting for Black and Brown communities, that's an issue we can tackle, but this isn't that issue. And if it is, then help me to understand how I can be more helpful to you.
It's not
Michael, it looks.
It's let's make it clear. It's not false reporting, because what they're reporting is accurate. The only thing I want everybody to keep in mind is, as we go along, just remember the inequalities, the injustice. So, the same thing. And if there's a call that comes on a white perpetrator or a Black perpetrator, doesn't matter. Make sure the policing's the same.
Right. So that's what I'm saying. So
not about the statistics of it or whatever else, but let's make sure we're here to change things. And
that's what we're trying to do. So that's what I want to get a sense. That's what we're trying to do. And I hope that everyone is here trying to do that same thing. Like Thomas, I don't want to negate that at all. Like, that is always at the center of the work that we're trying to do, is the making public safety in Red Wing equitable for all. I hope that's why we're all here, because otherwise this is like not the gig I signed up for, but that's what I'm hoping. what I'm getting a sense of, and I'm going to call it out, is the fact that it seems like some people have sort of some frustrations and I don't know what they are. And then other people are here sort of wanting to give process pieces. So if we could sort of clear the air on this before we leave out, because I know that some people were actively writing processes down, and Yadira never really talks, and she sort of came up with these amazing sort of policies, and I want to be able to uplift those. Sarah put together this really nice presentation. So like, can we sort of get some of those on paper? And then can we also really address sort of the tensions that are happening that I can't address if I'm not understanding where they're coming from or how I can be most effective and supportive here?
So why don't we just go through the rest of the folks so that we can make sure that everybody who wrote stuff down, should we do that right now, just for a couple minutes? Sarah, if you had to change one thing, what would it be? I mean, if you had things written down on your sheet of paper for how policies could change.
I would have all of law enforcement trained in FEDI, not Cornerstone, or both. And I really love the ideas that people have put forward of if someone calls 911, that they go filtered to Hope Coalition, because people do know the number of 911.
Okay, great. Cholaway. We're going kind of quick because we're on almost speed round now. So thanks.
Okay, so I just want to understand that what we're trying to do is to see if all these calls should go through 911 to the law enforcement, or they should go through Hope Coalition, because I do want to make sure we are covering this from the roots, because we can't be over there in the law enforcement if we're not trying to deal with the problem from where it begins, which means education, and also with Hope, because they are the people who are dealing with. I understand if I'm a victim, I would call 911 because I don't have anybody else to call, but it doesn't mean always that I need 911. So I agree that maybe we should have a way of getting to where we need to be through 911, and in that they can censor what calls they should respond to and go, or push over to 911.
So you're saying
to Hope.
So you're saying have an advocate always be present, whether or not that's through 911 or not?
Yeah, because my question to the chief was, does he think all these calls need to go through there? I mean, we are trying to see if the law enforcement should be dealing with this, or should we lift up some of this work and put it to the community, which I think that's what we're trying to get to. So I'm not understanding. My question is, do all these questions need to go through the law enforcement, or can some of them go through a Hope Coalition, so we can skip that, so that we can fund some programs in the community to help the victims themselves, as well as the people who are committing the crimes? Because I don't know how law enforcement, we are empowering the victims, because what we are trying to do is to move over, I think, to help people in the community, not to keep them where they are, right? Empower them. That's
Good.
what I think.
Thank you. Okay, Sam, you're up.
I first just wanted to tell Sarah that I apologize if I came off as not concerned for any victims. That was not my intentions. I just also did not want Thomas's point to go unacknowledged, because I felt that it was important. So with that being said, I think that we can say we can't control whether or not people are going to call Hope Coalition or 911 first, because most importantly, it's kind of embedded in our brains to call 911 if there's an emergency, or if it's like an immediate call for help. So if it's initially right away somebody's calling for a sexual assault, you'd think they'd call 911. We all can memorize that number. But if it's maybe Hope Coalition is getting more phone calls that are from the past assaults, where they had time to Google a number to find an advocate. I don't know what the difference is, but we can't control who people feel comfortable calling, whether it be 911 or Hope Coalition. That's just something that's not going to change. We can't control that. What we can control is something that Sarah spoke on earlier, is the options, giving the caller an option. So if they call 911, offer Hope Coalition immediately if they want them present, or if they only want Hope Coalition, then they can be transferred over, and then 911 does not need to carry on. And then, and or if somebody calls Hope, I think Sarah also said that they do ask, I don't remember the exact term you used for the police, but offering them to, or telling them that they can or they can't. You don't tell them, you give them the option.
Okay, great.
I guess kind of to explain this, but if both phone numbers had options for the specific call, then maybe it will be easier to collect data, because the numbers are being both called and recorded, I guess, and the other option is off.
Awesome. Okay, great, good. Doug.
The other thing I had written down was just finding a way to make it more common to get the advocate involved. I did like the Dira's comment on the bilingual stuff. I know in the ER that's a challenge that we face, and we do have an iPad for translation. But as you can imagine, trying to do the assault kit while talking to a video screen to explain everything that's going to go on in a process that takes some time is challenging. So that'd be something maybe the hospital side could work on. But as far as the policy goes, I'd say just trying to involve advocates more frequently. If that's something we can suggest or not, I don't know, but sounds like helpful according to Sarah, who's the expert. I'm not.
Okay, great. And Steve, I think we haven't heard from Steve.
Yeah, lots of good bits and pieces there, and this topic specific, there's so many variables. A person calls in at 3 o'clock in the morning and something just happened and it's been a stranger versus somebody they know. Are they in immediate danger? Does somebody need to get there? Can they wait for an advocate? That may take 30, 60, 90 minutes to get there. There's so many variables. As this happened a week or a month or 6 months ago, where they've had time to research and they can call other advocates or anything like that. So I think there's just lots of variables in each person that's going to make up their mind when they call, and then it can be triaged as they come in, because like several people said, 911 is just ingrained in everybody's mind.
Okay, good. Michael, Thomas, and then I think we'll have hit everybody. Michael? Okay. Thomas?
One thing that just came to mind here was kind of, if, the calls portion of it, if every call goes into 911, if the victim or whoever thinks it's an emergency should always call 911. But if they just want confidential, to speak to someone confidentially, they could, call the Hope Coalition and, do it that way is probably another thought of trying to handle the calls. But I think if it's a sexual assault, it's a crime. And so I think 911 should always be, or law enforcement should always be involved of that. But just on the fact of an emergency, or it happened and now they want to seek, some kind of solution going forward, they can call Hope.
Okay. So I'll hand it over to you, Dominique. I think everybody has spoken, but it sounds like also Sarah, I guess I just don't want to leave the program that you offered up tonight to everybody. You've got options. It does sound like the majority of people tonight like the idea of having options and having an advocate more quickly involved in calls that maybe they aren't right now. that seems to be the consensus. I'll let Dominique kind of lead us through the rest, but it does sound like we don't want to leave that you've got options. That sounds like one good program that this group may want to think about. And that's something when we're talking about homework and we're talking about doing work ahead, maybe that's us sending more information out, getting people to be able to read up on it, learn about it, getting notes out from what you all said tonight, getting back some questions, getting some more feedback from the police department. I'm talking too much and it's Dominique's thing, but these are thoughts that are going through my head because a lot of folks are saying different things, but it seems like it is coming down to getting folks that advocate and getting options.
Can I say something real quick?
Yes, I was just gonna say, is Lexi on here? 'Cause
I am.
Oh my gosh, Alexis, where are you?
Sorry, yeah, I've had my camera off. My child has been ridiculously crazy around me, so.
Sorry, that's my bad. Yep. Hi. I'm glad you're weighing in.
Sorry, yeah. I think that it's I'm gonna make it short and sweet because I know it's 8:02. But I think that it's a really good idea to have the being a victim myself, not everybody wants to go through law enforcement. So I think that it would be a really good idea to because I had no idea that you could even have an advocate, any of that, none of that. So I think that it would be a really good idea to have that option available when you call 911, because like everybody else was saying, that's just what you're going to do. You're going to call 911 first. Like that's engraved in your brain. I had no idea about Hope Coalition until maybe a year ago. And so, I think that it would be a really, really good idea that if they had that option when you called 911, like, hey, well, we can do this for you, or just have an advocate there for you, period. Like, I don't know. That's just how I feel about it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'm glad that I'm sorry that I skipped you, Alexis.
I am glad that you chimed in, Alexis, because I think that that was a really good note to sort of end on for us to really reflect on sort of why we were here tonight to sort of put these forward. What I would say is that Michelle and I should send out some more materials on You Got Options so that people can take a look and we really decide, like, is it You Got Options? Is it an alternative program? Is it something in the wheelhouse of that, so that, as Alexis said, we can promote the best sort of practices and recommendations for moving this conversation forward. So I leave it all up to you to drop us a line about what would be most helpful. I know Samantha loves homework and wants more of it. So what we'll do is try to find a way to be able to get you more information about this particular program. And then Sarah, you can be the champion for it and tell us everything that we need to know or the pitfalls and things like that. But I do want us to come up with a solution that is, again, victim-centered, community-centered, and that everybody can sort of champion for the community at large, because it is a really heavy issue. And you want to make sure that everybody has an equitable stake in how the recommendation is sort of put forward, because it has sort of repercussions to different communities if the policy is not put forth and is not community-centered, victim-centered, and equitable and sustainable. Because what works now may not work in 5 years. And so we want to be able to make sure that what we're putting forward can last as long as we're able to sort of be a part of the process. And as someone did say, 18 months is not a long time. I just got off a call before this one where they have a task force for 5 months. So I don't know even how that's possible. So you guys are doing really, really, really amazing work. And just, it's tough. It's really tough work. And you all are sort of at the crossroads of being the change agents or sort of keeping the status quo. So I appreciate you all. Liz, I see your hand real quick, because I know people have to go.
Sarah and Chris, I just wanted to say I am not at all discounting the victim-centered approach and believing the victim. I'm not. I've been training that for over 20 years. As a human being, I cannot negate the importance of the 2 to 3%, because that 2 to 3% are falsely accused, are somebody's child, sibling, spouse, whatever. And they are as important when they're falsely accused as someone who is a victim. And so I didn't go to a legal, the false reporting, why I said restorative justice, it's centuries old, Native American based circle processes way of letting somebody know what you said to me, what you did to me. This is now my life. This is how I made it feel. And I've done a lot of studying on that process, and it's a very holistic approach of being able to see through somebody else's eyes what was happened to them. I 100% support the victim belief model, 100%. But I can't, in good conscience, just ignore the 2 to 3% and what life-changing that is for someone to be falsely accused of such a heinous crime, and what that does to them as a person, or what that does as a family to that person when they're accused. Thank you.
And that's why everything needs to be equitable in all of the solutions that we're proposing, because what impacts people in this way could impact someone else differently. And so it's not that we are valuing one or the other. What we need to make sure is that it's equitable for everybody, as Thomas has been saying the entire night, making sure that we understand that things are going to impact people in different ways. And so the solutions that we are sort of putting forth, or the recommendations, have to be rooted in understanding that what may work for A may not work for B, and A and B live in the community. So let's just put that forward. Again, thank you so much, Sarah, for being able to give the presentation. We are going to send out more materials so that people can be more informed about You Got Options. Go vote. Also, just to let you all know, this is tough. It's tough. And you guys you would pick the service call that was probably the most traumatic and tough for everybody. And so I have some sort of facilitation supports for healing and sort of that restorative justice piece you were talking about, Liz. And so I'm going to offer that to you all if that is of interest to you, for that group to come on with me at a time and do that. So I'll give more information and context for that, but it's tough. Our next meeting after the election is going to be tough. And I do not want it to be a space where we sort of become activated in the movement and not be able to continue to do what we signed up to do. So I want to be able to hold space for that and be able to bring that forward. So let me know how that works best for you all. Juan, you're going to make everybody upset because you're asking a question, but ask your question.
Just real quick, I wanted to acknowledge Chaz Neal. If you guys didn't watch the city council, the last city council meeting, go watch that PowerPoint. It was a lot of great information, and I definitely suggest and recommend for you to watch it if you guys didn't get a chance to watch that.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Again, we have a lot of work to do. 18 months is long, but not long enough. And so you let me know what you need to be able to show up in this space for your community members, because you are part of this team. And because I am sort of doing this at a distance, I want to make sure that I'm community centered and empowering your voices to do that work. So until next time, see you all soon, and enjoy the 17-degree weather I hear you have.
Oh, no, we're in the 50s. All right.
Oh, okay.
Have a good night.
Bye.